Hello 7th graders. Today we're going to be making a recipe called Emily's Pasta with Broccoli. It was given to me by a former student and it is delicious. For your ingredients today, you're going to need, starting with the broccoli. When you go to the store and you pick broccoli, you want to look for a stalk of broccoli that has bright green color. The buds on the top are closed and tight. You don't want any yellow or brown spots. It'll often have leaves coming off. That's fine, you can just pull those off. You want to make sure to wash your broccoli really well before you use it to get rid of any dirt, pesticides, chemicals that might be on there. Sometimes you even find an inchworm in there. So wash it really good, and then to prepare your broccoli for the lab today, we're going to actually be cutting it into something called a flowerette. This is a stalk of broccoli. A flowerette is a small piece. It looks like a little flower. So we're going to be using that today in our recipe. The other ingredient that we're going to need today is some butter. I've cut the butter into 2 tablespoon chunks for you, so you just need to pick up one of these. In order to cut down our saturated fat, because we know butter comes from animals and that's saturated fat, we're going to introduce some olive oil as well. Olive oil comes from plants, so that has unsaturated fat, a little healthier choice. You're going to be measuring a tablespoon of olive oil. You can measure over the small bowl to prevent spilling on the counter. The next ingredient is garlic. When you buy garlic in the store, it comes in a bulb. But we don't want to use a whole bulb of garlic. We're going to break off what's called a clove. You're going to either pick a large clove if you love garlic, or you could pick a smaller one if you don't love it so much. You'll notice that this garlic comes wrapped in a kind of a papery coating. We need to get rid of that coating. So in your kitchens, what I'm going to ask you to do is cut off the end of the clove, and I'm going to ask you to curl your fingers so that we don't have any cutting accidents. Cut off both ends of the garlic. And then if you want to, you can peel off that extra papery layer. Or, I'll show you a tip that the chefs do. They take a knife and lay it flat on a clove of garlic, and then just pound down with their hand. And when they do that, the paper just slides right off. And that's what we want. In your recipe, it's going to tell you to cut the clove of garlic in half. Sometimes when you smash it, it comes apart all on its own. So that's a bonus. The next ingredient we're going to be using is salt and pepper. It calls for a pinch of salt and a pinch of pepper. What I've done to make things a little easier for you today is I've mixed the salt and the pepper together in a custard cup. So if you just want to take a pinch of salt and a pinch of pepper, so that's going to be 2 pinches actually, because the salt and pepper is combined. If you're not comfortable with that, I've got a measuring spoon here. It's a 1/4 teaspoon. You can use half of that. The other ingredient is some Parmesan cheese. Our recipe calls for a 1/4 cup of Parmesan cheese. You can use the dry measure cup and measure over the bowl to catch any overage. Our very last ingredient today is the pasta. I've got 2 types of pasta here. One is the regular white pasta that you've probably all eaten, but I also wanted to provide you with some whole grain pasta. We've been talking about getting more fiber in our diets, and choosing a whole grain pasta can help you do that. The fiber content on the regular pasta is 2 grams of fiber. On the whole grain, it's 6 grams of fiber, so it's 3 times the fiber. Once you've got all of your ingredients pulled together, we need to look at the recipe and follow the steps in the recipe. There's actually 3 recipes going on at one time. We need to make broccoli, we need to make pasta, and we need to make a sauce to pull all of it together. This is what your final product is going to look like. I've got the nice rotini pasta and the bright green broccoli. It's covered in the sauce. Okay, to prepare the broccoli, the first thing you're going to do is take a medium-sized saucepan, something that looks like this. The recipe asks you to put about 2 inches of water in, and put a cover on it and put it on high heat. You want to bring the water in there to a boil. So I've got my cover on, 2 inches of water, put it on high heat. While you're waiting for that to come to a boil, you're going to prepare your broccoli. So earlier we talked about cutting the broccoli into flowerets, and that's great and all, but that seems like a really big piece for me to put on my fork and put in my mouth. So the recipe asks you to cut each flowerette into a bite-sized piece. Please use your good knife skills. You're going to take your hand over the top of the flowerette and just cut right down the middle until you get equal-sized pieces. If you have some very small pieces of broccoli and some big ones, they'll cook at different rates. One will be underdone, one will be overdone. So you want pieces about this size that will easily fit on a fork and in your mouth. Once you've got all of your broccoli cut into the flowerets, the directions tell you to add that broccoli to the boiling water. So I'm going to come on over to the stove, take the cover off the pan. We learned how to do that safely by turning the cover away from you so that the steam comes out. Set that cover on a heat-resistant surface. Put it right on that pan, and then put your broccoli in the boiling water. We want to avoid overcooking this broccoli so that it gets mushy and yellow. The directions tell you to cook it for about 3 minutes. At 3 minutes time, I'm going to ask you to check for doneness. That means take a fork, put it into one of the pieces of broccoli. If it won't go in, it's still too hard. It's got to cook longer. If the fork slides in, you can take that over to the sink, run it under cold water, give it a taste and see if you think it's done. If it is done, we call that tender crisp. I'm going to ask you to very carefully pick up your pan of hot water. You should have the burner turned off. And then say, "Hot water coming through, behind you, chef." That's what they say on the cooking shows. You're going to come on over to the sink. In your sink, you should have a colander. The colander is used to drain the broccoli. So I'm going to put that in the sink, and I'm going to very safely, away from me, pour my broccoli into the colander. The hot water will drain out, the broccoli will stay in the colander. Then the directions say to turn cold water on, run it over the broccoli because you want to stop it cooking. If you just leave it sit there in a pile, it will continue to cook. Once that's done, you're finished with the broccoli section of the recipe. You can put the pan back on the burner. The burner's off, remember. While you were doing that, someone else was doing the pasta. To get the pasta cooked, we need a much larger pan. Pasta needs to move around while it's cooking or it clumps together and sticks. So we're going to take this much larger pan, fill it up with about 4 inches of water. It's going to take a while for this to boil, so I would start this right away. Put a cover on to keep the heat in, turn the burner to high heat, and let that go until it comes to a boil. When it comes to a boil, you're going to add your pasta. So take the cover, lift it away from you to let the steam out, put the cover on a heat-resistant surface, put your pasta in. You're going to take a black spoon, a Teflon spoon, give it a stir so it doesn't clump together, and then you're just going to wait for it to cook. It takes about 7 to 8 minutes, it says on the box. It also says to cook it to al dente. If you know any Italian, you know that dente means teeth in Italian. So what that means is your pasta should be soft enough that you can bite it easily with your teeth, but firm enough that you have to use your teeth to bite into it. So to test that, go in, take a little bit out, maybe one piece of pasta out of the pan. You can put your fork in it to see if it's done. Run it under cold water, give it a taste. If it's soft enough to eat, but still firm, you're ready to go. What you're going to do with your pasta, very similar to the broccoli. Coming through with hot water, you're going to take your pan over to the sink. You still have the cold broccoli in the colander. You want to warm that broccoli up and drain the pasta at the same time. So I'm going to very carefully drain the rest of that pasta over the broccoli, warm up the broccoli. Almost done. We need to take this broccoli pasta mixture, put it back into the large pan. We're going to use this as our mixing bowl. So while one person was making broccoli, another was making pasta, another person was working on the sauce. To get the sauce going, what you're going to do is take your butter, put it into a saute pan, a small saute pan, let the butter melt. Once the butter's in the pan, you can never look away from it because it burns very easily. I need to cut. I forgot to. Okay, now that our broccoli and our pasta are well underway, we need to be thinking about the sauce. Earlier, we took a clove of garlic, removed the outer skin, and cut it in half. Now we can prepare our sauce. The directions tell you to melt the butter in a small saute pan. The saute pan is shallow, easy to melt the butter in. I'm going to take my piece of butter, put it inside over medium heat, not that medium-high heat that we've been using, and use a Teflon spoon to stir that butter around so that it melts. I can add the olive oil. When that's added, I'm ready to put in the garlic. Right now you'll notice that the garlic is very light in color, white. When we put it into the butter olive oil mixture, it'll start to cook and toast. We want it to be kind of a golden brown, just like toast would be in a toaster. So you stir, stir, stir. If you're in charge of the sauce, you can never turn and talk to someone or check on something else. You have to stay at the butter all the time because butter burns very easily and it gets kind of a dark color, it smells bad, and it doesn't taste very well. So if you're in charge of the sauce, you're here all the time. Once your garlic seems like it's golden brown, you can remove that from the pan, put it on a cutting board, and your butter mixture is done. If your group loves garlic, you can take that toasted clove of garlic, mince it into small pieces, and put it back into the pan. Otherwise, you can just throw it away. The very last thing we need to do is put everything together. So if you remember, our pasta and broccoli is in the big pan. We're going to take our butter garlic mixture, pour it over the top. We're going to add the salt and pepper and Parmesan, and then we're going to toss that so that everything is mixed together. You're ready to serve your pasta. When you get everything on the table and you're ready to go, please call me over because I'd love to see what you did.